Welcome to the eShopper Reviews Podcast, episode 27. This is the podcast for June 2023. I'm Jenn Ip.
And I'm Jake McNeil.
For those new to this podcast, eShopper Reviews is a subreddit on reddit.com where Jake reviews games on the Nintendo Switch platform, and you can find this subreddit at the URL reddit.com/r/eShopperReviews. We currently have over 2,200 reviews and counting, and we are supported by your donations on our Patreon, which you can find at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. This month's sponsors are Ben, Andy Miller, Xleen, Homer Simpin, Johannes, Talisa, Eli Goodman, Francis Ops, Gabriel Coronado Medina, Ilya Zarev, Christopher Wolf, and Seth Questionfield. Thank you all for helping to keep the reviews coming. You want to talk about the patron voted game? The standard one or the all patron vote one?
Well, eventually we're going to talk about them both.
Okay, let's go with the patron budget one then.
Okay, the budget one is the one that we actually have a clear winner of this month.
I'm probably going to butcher this pronunciation. Jarater RPG.
I have no idea how it's supposed to be pronounced. Jarater, Jarater. Yeah, I know nothing about the game, but this one got the most votes, so I will be reviewing it sometime in the month of June.
So the standard vote got a tie.
A 4-way tie, no less.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so the tie is A Space for the Unbound, Coffee Talk Episode 2, Hibiscus and Butterfly, ooh, Fashion Police Squad, and Never Awake.
Yeah, I've heard good things about A Space for the Unbound, but I know nothing about it. I reviewed the original Coffee Talk, so I'm kind of curious to see what they're doing with the sequel. I know nothing about Fashion Police Squad, and I know nothing about Never Awake, so I don't know which direction I'm going to go with this. I will review at least one of these games in the month of June.
Okay, so here are the games available for vote in June of 2023, which are...
This is the standard vote?
I believe so. Yes,
Okay.
This is the standard vote.
All right.
So we have Master Detective Archives, Raincode, Samba de Amigo Party Central, Dr. Fetus's Mean Meat Machine. That's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
We Love Katamari Reroll plus Royal Reverie, Etrian Odyssey Origins Collection, and Rune Factory 3 Special.
Yeah, so got some interesting choices this next month. Interestingly, I tried to pick the games that seemed like they were the most major releases. Nothing really from Nintendo, nothing like super groundbreaking, but a bunch of promising games nonetheless. I know nothing about Master Detective Archives Raincode, but it looked interesting in preview trailers. Samba de Amigo is the latest game in a long-running Sega Music Rhythm series, and I'll be curious to see how they handle the motion control stuff for that. Dr. Fetus's Mean Meat Machine is a spin-off of the Super Meat Boy games, and it sounds like they're doing kind of a riff on the Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine thing. Yeah, kind of a cute direction to go. Again, I don't know anything about this specific game, but given the lineage of the Meat Boy series, I feel like this is promising. I loved the original We Love Katamari, so I'm looking forward to the remake that's coming out on Switch. I love the Etrian Odyssey series, and I don't know how I'm feeling about these remakes. I'm kind of a little iffy on the footage that we've seen, and I'm kind of curious how the heck they're going to manage all of the stuff that was done with touchscreen now that you're on a platform that you can play docked. And then, of course, Rune Factory 3 Special. Well, I loved Rune Factory 4.
I love the whole series of Rune Factory, honestly. Okay, so the games for the all-patron budget game vote include Bubble Bird, Cabin Escape Alice's Story, Galaxy Revo Remake, Powers of Hex, Truck Climb Racing, and Your Future.
All of these games are games that were released in early 2023. In fact, I believe they're released in the last month or two. All of these games are $2 or less, and all of these games are games that I know absolutely nothing about. So
I've never heard of any of these.
No, you wouldn't. They're $2 games. How many $2 games can you name off the top of your head? Yeah, exactly. But I don't mean to say that to write them off or say that they're bad. Every now and then I find a $2 game that's actually pretty decent. I don't know. We'll see.
Okay, let's talk about some of the highlights for the games eShop reviews covered in the month of May 2023. Just a note here, these are not necessarily games released in the last month, but games reviewed that month, and we'll start by talking about the worst games.
Oh, starting with the worst of the worst. Okay.
Yep. Airport Flight Administrator Simulator and Air Traffic Sky Airplane Simplane Game. Oh my god, these titles.
This one, first of all, it's touchscreen only. If you want to play it docked, too bad, you can't. And I guess it kind of makes sense with the sort of mini games these are. These are really simple arcade-style mini games. And at least in theory, they all have something to do with airports, although in practice, they really have to stretch it. Like, they have a food management game where it's like, oh, you're one of the food vendors at the airport. And it's like, that's really stretching it. There's one where you're organizing items into a shopping cart because you're shopping for a trip that you're going to take at the airport. It's like, come on, you're really reaching here, guys. But if that was all that it was, I mean, it would be kind of dumb, but it would be fine. The problem with this one is that there's absolutely zero depth to these mini games. You play each one of these, and it's a fine little distraction for a couple of minutes, and then you're done with it, and you'll never want to go back. There's no kind of progression. There's no kind of goal that you're building toward. It's like you're done with the mini game, and hey, if you want to play the mini game again, you can, but why would you? Okay,
so next one is Loot Box Simulator RPG Anime Girls, then Loot Box Simulator Crimson Fire, and Loot Box Simulator Heroes of the Dark Age, which all got Fs.
I lumped all of these Loot Box Simulator games together, and that's because they pretty much play exactly the same. The only difference between them is the aesthetic elements, all of the images in the game, the atmosphere you're in. And the basic idea is you are given 4 options, and it's not really clear which of these options is better or what criteria you're judging them by. Presumably you're trying to go for the best option, but what does best mean? They'll be phrased like you're on a random RPG quest, and it's like, do you buy potions in a store? Do you go and raid the dungeon? Do you talk to your friends? Or do you sleep in for the day? Which one of those is best? What is best? What's the criteria here we're judging this by? Well, I could approach this like, buying potions sounds like a reasonable precaution to take. Well, you lost money, so that's not best.
Mm.
Talking with friends is nice. Okay, that's a little best. You got a few extra points or whatever the currency they use here is. And it's like, you're just repeating one after another after another after another of these without any rhyme or reason, without any indication of what criteria you're judging by, and without even any consistency. Because answering the same way multiple times, you could get different results. And all of this is building towards you're saving up points or money or whatever toward getting one of these loot boxes opened, which gives you a bunch of pieces of artwork based on the theme of each one of these games. The thing is, this artwork does nothing. It's not used in the game. It's not like you're getting buffs for the game or getting characters that you can use or weapons or whatever. It's just artwork. And even if you're interested in seeing the artwork, you can't zoom into it. You can't manipulate the artwork in any way. It basically puts it up full screen and just says, there it is. If you don't like it like that, too bad. That's all you get. And it's like everything that this game does that is interesting, let's say that you like the artwork that's in the game, just get on DeviantArt or go to one of countless other art websites that you can see millions of pictures on without spending money and without going through a stupid game that makes no sense, that has no consistency. These games are an absolute waste. There is no reason to play them at all whatsoever.
Okay, next up we have Dot Cat Milk, Axolotl, and Rafa's World.
So each of these games has a different rating on them, but I lumped them together because each one of these is a part of a bundle that I also reviewed this month. The Rafa's World plus Axolotl plus Cat Milk bundle, or .cat milk. Okay, all of these are fairly simple platformers. All of them are pretty bad. I'd say of the three of them, Rafa's World is probably the best, but I mean, even then, none of them is really all that good. However, I feel like all of these deserve to be considered collectively the worst games that I reviewed this month, because there is a bundle that contains all of these, I just mentioned it, and the bundle costs less money to buy than each game in the collection on its own costs. If you only wanted to buy the game Axolotl for some reason, even though it's not a great platformer, let's say you wanted to buy it, even if you bought it on sale, let's say you got it at $2, you would still be better off getting the bundle that contains all three games for 75 cents. I don't get it. I just don't see why anyone would want to buy these games individually, not just because they're bad games, which they absolutely are, but because there's another way to get them that's cheaper and gives you more stuff. And I don't know, maybe they priced it that way to convince you to get the bundle. Like, oh, I'm getting a real deal if I get this bundle. I'm getting all three of these games for only 75 cents. And it's like, yeah, comparatively, you're getting a good deal there. There's still three really terrible games, but that doesn't make that bundle good. It doesn't make it worth 75 cents. It just makes the other games worth less, because why on earth would you buy them individually? No, don't.
All right, so the last one for this category is Professor Miyamoto's Soroban and Flash Anzan.
You're taking these in a very odd order. You're doing it just to defy me, aren't you?
I'm keeping you on your toes.
Okay. Professor Miyamoto's Soroban and Flash Anzan. It seems like we have a theme with this month's selection for Worst Game, which is, what's the point? In this particular case, Professor Miyamoto's Soroban and Flash Anzan is a free-to-play game. And it's educational. Hey, that's great. But the thing is, it's basically flashcards. It's add these two things together and what do you get? And fine, I can see how that might appeal to someone with small children who would get some sort of advantage out of having math-based flashcards, although they're presented here in about as boring a fashion as you can get. That in and of itself would be pretty meh. The real problem here is that this game has some absurd monetization, especially for a game that's supposed to be educational. For them to be basically charging players ticket prices in order to play the game multiple times, that's pretty nasty. It's nasty that they're charging in that way. It's nastier that they're doing so in a game for children. I'd say the game's only saving grace is it's so boring and pointless that you're unlikely to find many people that get caught up in the ugly monetization. If the game were actually fun to play, the monetization would be more offensive. Here, it's still pretty offensive, but the game is so terrible that it's just like, just ignore it. You won't have to deal with the terrible monetization.
Okay. Next up, we have the hidden gems, starting with Plague Inc. Evolved.
Plague Inc. is a game that gained popularity on mobile devices. It's been super popular for, I want to say, maybe a decade now. And the main idea behind this game is you picture a global pandemic game where you're trying to, save people from the pandemic, except that's not the main point of this game. The main point of this game is you are playing as the pandemic, trying to evolve the disease so that it becomes more virulent, so that it becomes more contagious and more deadly, with the ultimate goal of you want to wipe out all of humanity. And it's an interesting premise. If it was a game that was created during the pandemic, it might be a questionable choice of topic matter, but this game predates the actual pandemic by some years now, thankfully. It got a port to consoles. It got ported to like one and then the next and the next. And I would say out of all of them, the Nintendo Switch port of the game probably fares the worst because it lacks the multiplayer content that was in other versions of the game. Despite that there are references to multiplayer content in the game, which is kind of odd. But even without the multiplayer content, it is still a very fun and accessible simulation-style game. It has a lot of content, like there's even user-created content that's included in here, like users have created variants of the virus where it's like fake news spreading, or where it's Trumpism that's spreading, or where it's a board game that you're trying to get to be so popular that everyone on the planet plays it. It's very silly at times, but it's genuinely fun. There's a lot of just, I want to try one more run. Let me see if I can do better than the last one. It's a really great game. I highly recommend it. It's like a management game. Yeah, it's a bit different than a lot of other simulations because you're not managing in individual areas. You're basically managing the entire world at once and being like, oh, well, I'm having trouble getting into Madagascar is one of the problem places. Maybe I need to make it so that my disease travels on ships easier. But you can't specifically pinpoint that area and say, I want you to invade here. You have to kind of do it from a top-down kind of view. It's a really fun game, fairly unique. If you're looking for a game where you play the villain, this is kind of an abstract way of doing that. Yeah, billions of deaths on your head. Go for it. Have fun.
Next up is Crazy Bmx World.
I did not realize that the Bike Rider series, which was on Nintendo 3DS, I didn't realize that this series was compiled into this collection because it's not called Bike Rider on Nintendo Switch. It's called Crazy Bmx World. This is a compilation of Bike Rider DX, Bike Rider DX2 Galaxy, and the previously Japan-only game, Bike Rider DX3 Time Rider. And despite, all the Galaxy and the time stuff, really it's a fairly simple autorunner game. But it's simple in a way where it's compelling. Again, it's one of those, let me just try one more run sort of thing. The physics are simple, but they're easy to get a grasp on, and they're fun. And overall, I just thought, as this type of game goes, this is one of the better ones in the genre, I think. And at $3, that is such a good deal. If you are looking for a very inexpensive autorunner style game, this is definitely one to get.
Galaxy The Void Deluxe Edition.
So there was another free-to-play version of Galaxy on Nintendo Switch at some point, but it has since been removed from the Nintendo Switch eShop. And maybe that's just as well. I've heard not so great things about it. I couldn't tell you. I haven't played it. But this version, the paid version of the game, is actually really good. It's got some roguelike elements. It's a 2D space shooter, which is like, it's a bit like a two-stick shooter, except for there's no second stick. You just have to kind of account for inertia and things like that. Really good gameplay, surprisingly good graphics, like really good lighting and shadow effects here. And just an overall really good kind of spacey action game. Definitely worth playing.
Next is Some Distant Memory.
Some Distant Memory is a post-apocalyptic game. I would say it combines graphic adventure and visual novel elements. It kind of leans heavily into the visual novel stuff because, while there are technically puzzles in this game, they're not especially puzzling. It's not something that you'll be struggling to figure out. It's just do this thing to do this thing. However, despite that it doesn't have much going in the way of gameplay, the story in this game is so compelling that I feel like it gets a pass. it's actually got a story within a story. You've got these characters who are rummaging around in a house years after some sort of apocalyptic event. And you get their story, the story of these survivors trying to struggle in a modern, post-apocalyptic world, while also digging up relics of the past in search of some sort of hope for a better future. Meanwhile, as they are scanning these relics of the past, they're using them to piece together a simulation of events that happened in that past. And through that simulation, you get a second story of the people who lived in this household and the struggles that they went through. And I think that they do a good job with both of these stories. They make both the current day stuff and the post-apocalyptic future stuff compelling and interesting with good characters. So if you're looking for that kind of story, one that follows multiple threads and all of them are kind of good, this is definitely a good one to go for.
Last up, we have Jet Set Knights.
Jet Set Knights is kind of a single-screen arcade-style action platformer. I was reminded a lot when I played this one of Towerfall, which isn't really super fair to this game because Towerfall is just so much better. But that said, this game does have some original elements to it. It has a bit of a tower defense element where you're trying to protect a princess from invading monsters. And there's some good action here. I would say the level design leaves a lot to be desired, but aside from that, it's just a solid action platformer, kind of arcade-style game.
All right, so you have one game for the noteworthy review, which is Row.
Yes. This was one of the patron voted games for the previous month. This was the budget game that was chosen. And I'm not sure how the accent mark on this changes the pronunciation, like if it's ruh or ru or I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable on accent marks. So I think we're just going to go with row, lacking the knowledge of what that means. This is a pretty straightforward platformer. It's pretty clear that there was some Mario inspiration here, but don't let that fool you into thinking that this is even close, even in the same ballpark as the quality of a game like a Mario game. And in fact, in this game, the idea is that you cannot really take out enemies. You can't fight them. You can only just try to get past them. And it's some fairly simple obstacle course style levels. There's nothing special going on here. The platforming is not great. It's passable. I mean, it's not even remotely good, but it's passable. This is one of those things where I think the price is really the element that saves this game and makes it even remotely worthwhile. It's 50 cents. And for 50 cents, do I feel like I got 50 cents worth of game out of this? Sure, I guess. Is it a game that I would go back to? No. Is it a game that I will even remember 6 months from now? Probably not. But is it worth 50 cents? I suppose maybe some people might enjoy the brief distraction it provides. A couple quarters worth? Yeah, maybe. I suppose that is lukewarm praise for this game, but if it wasn't for that low price, trust me, I would have a completely different opinion of this. As it stands, it's fine, I guess.
So, on to the next category, which is the best games. We'll start with Sonic Frontiers.
Oh man, Sonic Frontiers. So, Sonic Frontiers, how can I put this? It is a faceplant of a video game that still manages to nail the trick. It has all kinds of stuff that's going wrong with it. It's all kinds of janky and broken and doesn't do things efficiently or well. Yet despite itself, it still manages to be a really fun game. And I don't know how it does that. I don't know how it managed to pull a victory out of the defeat that it has permeating throughout it. But it's Sonic in an open world, or open zone they call it, but for all intents and purposes it's open world. There are like 4 or 5 large areas with individual challenge areas within them. But for the most part, within each of those areas, they're fairly large. I'm going to call it open world. It's pretty much an open world game. And for a Sonic the Hedgehog game in an open world, it works pretty well in that it's fun to go around and discover things and find new challenges. And everything that you do in that world opens up the world more and makes traversal easier and gives you more stuff you can do. And that's fun to expand what it is you can do. Granted, the combat's not great. The platforming is messy. There's all kinds of, like I said, jankiness going on. This is not a game that arrives at being a great game through skill, but through pure fluke of, hey, it just happens to be fun. And sometimes that happens. Is this Sonic's Breath of the Wild moment? No. No. It's not really anything I could compare something to. It's a good game, and it's just lucky that it's that. But it's fun. If you like Sonic, you'll enjoy this game. I don't know if it's his best game, but it's definitely one of his best.
Okay. Next up, we have Tactics Ogre Reborn.
Tactics Ogre is one of the games that really solidified the turn-based strategy RPG tactics style game. It's one of the games that subgenre is named after. It's not the first. There have been other ones. The Fire Emblem series in particular goes back a long ways. There's also the Shining Force series that are both kind of along the same lines. However, Tactics Ogre and Final Fantasy Tactics were the two that really solidified what this genre would be going forward. And as this game goes, this is a remake of the original Tactics Ogre that came out. I want to say it was on Super Nintendo in Japan or Super Famicom in Japan, and then PlayStation, which it came over in America on PlayStation. I think it was on Saturn as well. Anyway, this is still to this day a pretty good tactics-style, turn-based strategy RPG. It's a little plain by today's standards, but not bad. Really, I think the biggest problem with this remake of the game is actually a self-imposed flaw, because this game puts multiple checks in place to keep you from progressing unless you play through the main story. Like, your characters cannot level past a certain point until you get back to the main story. You have a limited money supply, and the only way to get more money is to progress the story to get more access to more areas. I understand the reasoning behind this, because this is making sure that the challenge level remains consistent, but not everyone's going to want that. Some players like to play these games to overpower their characters into this massive powerhouse that just tramps over everything in front of them. And if you don't want to play the game like that, well, then just progress the story. This game doesn't give you the choice. It says you cannot get overpowered at any point in the game, even if you want to. And I feel like that's a flaw, especially compared to other more recent games in the genre, like, well, the big one that comes to mind is the Disgaea series, which absolutely loves grinding if you want to do that. As it stands, it's still a good game. I just feel like it specifically puts in gameplay elements that make it worse than it could have been.
So this one is the patron voted game, which is Little Gator Game.
Not Little Gator Game.
Little.
Lil. So, Lil Gator Game, I believe this came out in 2022. This is, if I had to pick one word to describe this game, it is adorable. It is so adorable. The idea is that you're playing this little anthropomorphic alligator who wants to play with his big sister and go on a fun little quest. And his big sister is too busy with schoolwork to join in his little playtime. And so he's going around the island to all of his other little children friends, and he's trying to convince them to join in his RPG, and maybe they can make it so awesome that his sister will have to join in with them. And it is so wonderfully cute. All of the little kids are involved in their own little things. They're interested in their own worlds. And he's trying to find ways to incorporate that into his little RPG. Like, there's this one kid who doesn't want to play the quest with the guy with the sword or whatever. He wants to play ninjas with his little group of friends. So you convince him, well, you can be an allied ninja village who can be allied with our town of... It's so cute to see how he kind of twists and turns everything to try and make it into a part of his game. As far as the gameplay goes, this is very much like a very light version of something like... I almost want to say like Breath of the Wild, but it's very small scope compared to that. There's a good amount of platforming. You do have a glider like you have in Breath of the Wild, and you're just going around trying to find your little childhood buddies and convincing them to join you in your game. It's just a delight to play this one. To the Patreon patrons who voted for this game this month, thank you very much. You selected a pretty good one, I think.
So, Octopath Traveler 2.
I know you were looking forward to this one.
I was. I still don't have time to play it, though. And judging from what you've told me about it, I may be extremely reluctant to.
Before the listeners jump to conclusions here, I really liked Octopath Traveler 2. I thought it was an excellent game and a solid sequel. This is a traditional Japanese-style turn-based RPG, and it has really good writing, really good story, good voice acting, good characters, and the gameplay is even more involved, more fun than the previous game. They add in a new day-night element that's interesting. The issue is the same issue that I had with the previous Octopath Traveler, which is you have 8 main characters. You can start with them in any order, and they will gradually join up with you on your quest as you progress through the game. But their 8 individual stories have very little to do with each other, and the characters themselves don't really have any kind of meaningful conversations with each other, outside one exception, which I'll mention later. You'll meet up with one of the characters who's a player character, and it'll be like, oh, you seem like you might be helpful. Let me tell you my tale. And it's like, there is nothing about your specific character that he's addressing. He's basically joining up with your party because you're playing one of the main characters and he's a main character too. And that's really disappointing in a game where this story is such a major element. You want to see more interplay between these characters, and there's not a whole heck of a lot of that. Later in the game, and by later I mean like 10 or 15 hours into the game, you do get some side quests where the characters do actually interact. But this seems like slapping a band-aid on a bullet wound, and I feel like they needed to work harder to integrate all of these characters into each other's stories, and they didn't even bother. They're just like, well, we'll make a side quest where these 2 characters interact, and we'll make another side quest where these 2 characters interact. And in battle, they'll be like, oh, good job, Scholar, or, hey, well done, and they'll say their name. And it's like, that's nice surface level stuff, but I want, these are such good characters, I want to see them interacting more, and they don't. However, despite this major complaint about this game, it is still an excellent, great throwback to the classic JRPGs of ages past. It is an excellent entry in the genre. It makes really good use of the HD 2D art style. Maybe not as impressive as previous games have been, but it still looks really great. Overall, if you're a fan of turn-based RPGs, this is a must-have.
Okay, so we have one more game in the best games category.
Oh, are we going to talk about it?
We will, last, because we have a gigantic discussion related to it.
Mm-hmm.
But...
well, did we want to talk about the other thing first, because we'll really quickly go over it?
Oh, yes. How about you talk about it?
Just like, I'm not even going to bother.
Yeah, no. Go ahead. Just make it quick.
All right. One of the things that happened on Nintendo Switch this month was there was a release for the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack, specifically for the Game Boy Advance app. They released in May Super Mario Advance, Super Mario World, Super Mario Advance 2, and Yoshi's Island Super Mario Advance 3. And all 3 of these are really great games that we already have on the Nintendo Switch in the form of the Super Nintendo versions of these games. Granted, all of these have tweaks and differences, that things that were changed slightly for the Game Boy Advance releases. And I'm sure some people might have a preference for these versions of the game over the Super Nintendo versions. I feel like it's kind of a trade-off. Like, you get some extra features, but you also have to deal with a lower resolution, smaller screen size. And I'm not sure that trade-off is really worth it. In the end, I guess I'm not upset that these are added to the Nintendo Switch Online expansion pack. I just feel like this is as disposable a release on Nintendo Switch Online. It's as disposable release for that as we've ever gotten. So now on to the topic that you had some words about.
So at first, we were a bit reluctant to talk about this, and then we realized, wait a minute, this game is also on the Switch.
Yes, and it ties into another thing that's also going to affect the Switch as well.
So several days ago,
As of this recording, Aaron Keller, I think that's his name, who's the head of development for Overwatch 2, announced that the PvE content, the hero-driven, talent-based story that was talked about since 2019 has been canceled. Oh, what? You mean the entire reason there even is an Overwatch 2?
Yeah. I am furious.
Oh, as I understand it, a lot of Overwatch players are pretty upset about this.
I am so furious. The day that I heard that news, I was so distraught because that was the whole reason why I was staying interested in the game at all, was because, we'll probably get a mode where we can put talents into trees and, maybe certain abilities would do something different than usual, or certain abilities that have been taken away because of adjustments for PvP would make a comeback, like Hanzo's storm arrows or Orissa's movable wall. No, it's not happening, apparently. And what makes my blood boil is Activision Blizzard knew that was a decision, and they made that decision a year and a half ago, and they just now decided to tell the public about it.
Well, at least they let you know sometime, right?
I'm so furious that I legitimately hope that there is going to be a class action lawsuit against them. I really hope. I don't know if it will actually happen, but I really hope so. I know that the whole development team for Overwatch 2, including Aaron Keller, has been getting a lot of heat lately. And, maybe it's not even his fault. Maybe it was a decision that was made higher up than he. But it still doesn't make me any happier.
Would you find it accurate, in light of this news, if I were to say that Overwatch 2 is basically just a forced content patch for Overwatch 1?
Yeah, it really is. There's a negligible difference in graphics.
Well, they changed the number of people the number of players on each team, right?
And they
made it free to play.
They made it, I wish they didn't. Honestly, I really wish they didn't.
Oh, that's what I've heard too.
Because before, in Overwatch 1, there was just a loot box system, which wasn't great, but in comparison to the Battle Pass, it was so much better, and I really wish they would bring it back. But now that Overwatch 2 is free to play, the Battle Pass and the microtransactions are the only way for them to make money. It's so aggravating because these skins are old ones from Overwatch 1 that you could have gotten.
Oh, they didn't even make new ones.
They did make new ones, but here's the thing. I don't think I've encountered a single skin that cost less than $15. Yikes. And this includes ones that were in the previous game. Oof. And some of these skins are going up to like $45. And granted, yes, they include other things like sprays and souvenirs,
but it's all cosmetic.
It's all cosmetic, and it's not worth it.
Yeah,
it's just not. And I'm so angry. I hope whoever's listening to this knows how angry I am, because I've been looking forward to this.
Can we hear you go grrr so we can hear your anger?
Very funny.
So it's funny, I'm reminded of Rocket League. At one point, Rocket League was a paid game, and then it went free to play. And I don't recall hearing much complaining about it at the time. Like, yes, I'm sure you had people who bought into it who were frustrated with that, but they got compensated with extra content or something, if I recall correctly.
I think so. And quite honestly, I don't remember that much backlash about Rocket League.
And the thing is, it's not like they changed the monetization when they went free to play. They're just like, it's the same game, but now it's free to play. Which, in my mind, just made it better. They already had monetization in it, which is never great in a paid game, but fine. And then they made it free to play, and it's like, okay, now the monetization makes sense. And they still have a lot of content in the game. They still kept making new content for it. And I felt like if you're going to make a game go from paid to free to play, pretty good way to go about it, I feel like. In Overwatch 2's case, they tried to make it appear as if it was a new game when I don't think anyone was fooled. Yep. Like, if it's a new game, then why can't I play the original Overwatch? Mm-hmm. Why did they force me to upgrade from Overwatch 1 to 2? If it's a new game, I should be able to play both separately. If I prefer the old way that Bastion used to play instead of the new way he plays now, I should still be able to play Overwatch 1. It's a different game, right? No. It's not. It's the same game with a number placed on it after a patch. This isn't Overwatch 2. This is Overwatch version 2. And the other thing is, I feel like this underlines, do not ever place too much stock in a roadmap. A roadmap is a promise that could always prove to be empty. It's always prone to having the potential to change or just disappear if the developer or publisher feels like, well, things aren't going quite the way we hoped, or, well, we realized we can't deliver on our promises, or, well, there wasn't the amount of interest in this game that we expected. Roadmaps are meaningless until they are actually fulfilled. Never buy into a game if you are doing so based on a roadmap. Buy into a game based on what they are offering right now.
So, Aaron Keller is trying to put out fires right now.
I'm not surprised.
He's trying to clarify that PvE modes aren't going to be completely removed from Overwatch.
Oh, they're just promising the same thing that they've been doing all along, though, right?
Which is kind of fair, because there are PvE modes.
They're like temporary events, right?
They're temporary events, and they use the same maps that are already playable in the PvP mode. There's nothing different than that. There's, little robots and things you can shoot at, but that's about it.
But it's the same thing you've been getting all along.
Yes, and they go away after a while. And I'm assuming those aren't going to go away, and they might add more. That's great. That's not what I was looking for, Blizzard.
So this kind of ties into the other thing that we were going to talk about that was related to this, which is a lot of people, I feel, gave Activision Blizzard a bit of a pass once it was announced that Microsoft was looking to acquire them.
Yep.
Once Microsoft was looking to acquire them, people said, oh, all of this sexual abuse stuff, all of this harassment and discrimination that Activision Blizzard is guilty of, it's going to be fine now that Microsoft's going to take over, which is ridiculous on multiple counts. Number one, there have been no promises made that the people in charge of this, people responsible for this, are going to be held accountable. They haven't been. Bobby Kotick is still in charge of Activision Blizzard. The guy who was there through all of the sexual abuse and discrimination, he's still in charge. If the Microsoft acquisition goes through, which is now a big question mark, we don't know. If that goes through, we don't know that he's going to leave. He could still be in charge. And I feel like...
So, here's the thing. It sounds like Bobby Kotick will still be CEO if Microsoft even acquires Activision Blizzard. So there goes that idea.
Of course, even that is a big question mark now, because the UK Competition and Markets Authority has denied, has refused to accept, has blocked the Activision Blizzard acquisition by Microsoft. And so it kind of puts the whole acquisition up in the air. Like, there have been other government boards that have approved it. What does it mean if one government approves it and another doesn't approve? Does Microsoft have to redo things in that country to get it to pass? I'm not sure of the business end of this. I'm not a business expert when it comes to this thing, but it definitely puts it all up into the air. And again, it kind of brings us back to these companies are not our friends. And while I'm sure that many of us had some hope that Microsoft acquiring Activision Blizzard might help to resolve some of these issues that Activision Blizzard has been responsible for, we've had no real justification for that hope. It's all been kind of based on the what if. What if Microsoft comes in and cleans house? And now it's looking like that might not even be possible, but
I've lost so much of my hope and trust with Activision Blizzard this past 2 years.
But you're still playing their games.
Not nearly as much, especially after hearing that news. I will be playing a lot more of another game, though.
Yeah, so we're transitioning back into good news, huh?
Yeah, I think I'm good with raging.
So we skipped over one of these selections for the best games that I've reviewed in the month of May 2023. And we skipped over it in part because we figured we'd have a lot to talk about here, and that, yeah, it's kind of a big deal.
You mean Tears of the Kingdom?
Yes. So this month, The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom finally released, and both of us have played it. I've reviewed it. I gave it an A++.
Granted, Jake has put in almost 70 hours into the game. I've played it for about 2.5.
I think you played it for a bit.
Maybe 3. Maybe 3.5.
So we're going to start trying to keep things spoiler-free. But at some point, in order to talk about stuff, we got to spoil things. Jen, for her part, there's a bit of an introductory area like there was in the first game. In the first game, there was the Great Plateau, where you'd spend the first few hours of the game on to learn how to do everything, to get the basic abilities, and then you'd be set loose on the massive open world. This game, it's very similar. You have an opening island of sorts that you start out on, where you get all of your abilities, and then shortly after that, you are set loose on the open world.
And the open world is massive.
Oh, yes.
It is massive, and there's more than one layer to it.
We'll talk about that a bit more, but I feel like talking about that in full
I don't think it's a spoiler because it was kind of alluded to in the trailer.
Part of it was, but part of it wasn't.
Yes, but I'm not... What I just said doesn't quite touch that, so it's okay.
We'll get to that in a bit.
Yeah.
Because that is something we will have to talk about here.
I will say, Nintendo, I am very impressed. A lot of software developers are extremely impressed. The amount of videos that have been made and what you can do in this game has been incredible and hilarious.
So, let's start by talking about our experiences, and we can get to those videos later, because that's definitely worth talking about. So what I was getting at a moment ago is, Jen, if I were to suggest how far Jen has progressed, she has gotten off the introductory island. She has gotten the glider that was in the previous game. I don't think it's a spoiler to say it's here too. She has taken care of a few tasks on the world below, but she hasn't done anything major aside from, I think she's activated a few towers. Towers are something that come back in this game, but they're kind of different. You're not climbing a tower to activate it like you were in the previous one. You're just trying to get into the tower, and sometimes there are little quests that are associated with it. But this isn't an Ubisoft tower thing. Okay, when we talk about Tears of the Kingdom, there are two major changes to the game. Number one is the worlds, which the different maps in the game, which we'll talk about in a bit. But the short version is there's flying islands, and you can go all the way up into the air and then down to the earth and more. And the other major change are the new abilities. In the previous game, you had Magnesis, you had, let's see if I can remember all of them.
I don't even remember them myself.
Cryosis, You had Stasis and one other that I'm forgetting.
Either way, those don't even... No. They're not in the game anymore.
Those abilities are gone in this game. Some of them have been replaced with something that's like an even better substitute. Like, for example, in the previous game, Magnesis lets you move around any object that was metallic. In this game, you have Ultra Hand, which lets you not only move around any object that's not glued down to the ground, but you can then paste them together and join them up into vehicles or structures as you see fit. Yeah, people came up with some interesting stuff here. Jen alluded to, like, there have been videos online of people making attack helicopters, giant mechs. There was someone who made a statue with flaming parts that was highly amusing.
Yes.
People have, quote unquote, committed war crimes against Koroks who have come back in this game. Oh yeah, all kinds of really hilarious stuff.
I've had to scroll past so many videos on my feed because they're spoilers for me, but they're so funny.
In addition to just joining together like logs and panels of wood, there are also machine parts based on this like ancient civilization. Like you can get a fan part that you can attach to a few pieces of wood and then it becomes a motorboat. Or you can attach multiple fans around the side and then it becomes a hovercraft.
Yep.
One of the things that I think Jen has fallen in love with are these pieces that are shaped like a little glider and you can attach fans to and then it becomes a powered glider.
Yes.
And all kinds of fun potential with that.
And let's not forget about the capsule toys.
Oh, yes. You come across these capsule machines, and they're spread throughout the world. You find tons of them. But each capsule machine can give you a variety of different little machine parts that you can attach to your creations. And the little capsules that you get to keep them in your inventory until you want to pull them out and use them. And there's some stuff... like, you can get the fans that we were talking about. You can get...
the gliders.
Yeah, the gliders.
You can get little dragon mouth-looking things that shoot out fire.
Oh, yes.
There are plenty more. I won't spoil them.
But... oh, yeah. There's some that you haven't even encountered yet.
Yeah,
There's
I know
tons
that.
you haven't encountered
I know
yet.
that.
And some of the fun of this is finding these new pieces and then figuring out ways to piece them together with stuff you already have.
And then figuring out how to solve puzzles with all of these different parts.
One of the great things about this game is that a lot of the puzzles in this game, it might be clear that there's an intended solution, but you have all sorts of other ways to solve problems. And when Jen was playing through the game, I was watching her as she was playing a lot of the time, and some of the stuff she was doing, I was like, I totally went about that a different way. That is not how I did this at all. And there were even a few things that she did that made me go, I had no clue you could even do that in the game. And the funny thing is a few of those things were even from Breath of the Wild. Like, one of the first things she did when she encountered a tree with apples in it was she took out a branch and thumped the tree with the branch to get the apples to fall. And I was like, I never even knew you could do that.
And I'm like, why would I waste time climbing up the tree?
Yeah. And that was in Breath of the Wild. But there was other stuff here. Like, I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say that you will encounter shrines in this game like there were in the previous one. Mm-hmm. And in the shrines, there will be puzzles. Totally not spoilery here.
Yep.
And in some of those puzzles, there will be blocks that you move around. And so at one point, Jen is manipulating these blocks, and then she uses this other ability called Fuse, which allows you to take any object in the environment and jam it onto your shield or your weapon. And she took one of the blocks and made a block shield with it. And I was just like, it never even occurred to me that this is something you could do. She has a shield shaped like a Tetris piece now. It's hilarious. And I'm not sure how good it is at being a shield, but just the fact that she can do that is so great. This is a game where it's a joy to watch someone else playing it, even if you've already played it through beginning to end, because you'll see them do things that you never thought was possible, that never even occurred to you. Or then the other thing is watching someone attempt something and totally mess it up.
Yeah.
Which, hey, I've done plenty. Trust me, Jen has done plenty, and she's only been playing the game for a few hours.
Well, no, you did have an audience when you were messing up, so okay, that's fine. That's fine.
I'm about, I want to say, Jen said I'm like 60 or 70 hours into the game.
Mm-hmm.
Much as in Breath of the Wild, there are 4 main quest things that you go to. I've done 2 of these, and I have done part of the 3rd. There's a bunch of other different smaller quests, or this might be a bigger quest thing. And that's one of the things I really love about this game that is kind of a little different from Breath of the Wild, which is in Breath of the Wild, you had the 4 divine beasts, you had to repair the Master Sword, you had shrines to increase your health and your stamina, you had Koroks to increase your inventory, and then you had the main confrontation with Ganon. And you knew from the moment you started the game exactly where to go to fight Ganon, and you could go straight to him if you wanted to. In this game, you have the 4 areas where something is going on, you're not entirely sure what, and you're not entirely sure what you're supposed to do there. And then you have a bunch of other mysterious phenomena that's cropping up. But number 1, the big evil bad guy in this game, you're not even entirely clear on where he is. Number 2, early on into the game, Zelda disappears, and it's not entirely clear what happened to her, where she is, or what you're supposed to do about it. Early on into the game, you basically lose your Master Sword, and it's not clear where you need to go to get it back, what you need to do to repair it, because it gets damaged. And it's like there's so many big question marks hanging above the air in this game, and the game basically says, yeah, I'm not going to tell you, you figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to go around, you need to ask people, you need to help people out in hopes that maybe you'll hit upon an answer to one of these questions that you're hit with early into the game. I feel like before we go too much further, we probably need to get into spoilery territory.
Just a little bit.
And by spoilery, I'm not going to reveal any major story spoilers, in particular because Jen hasn't even been introduced to much of the story.
Mm-mm.
But I'm talking about things that you encounter in the game that have not been in the trailers. So if you have been trying to hold off on watching anything related to the game and you do not want spoilers, and if you haven't played the game yet, I'm going to warn you right now, I'm going to go into slightly spoilery territory. But having said that, I kind of alluded to earlier that there are multiple maps in this game. You start out in the sky on one of these sky islands, these islands floating in the sky. This is where the opening area is, and there are a bunch of little other islands dotting the landscape. And you can actually get super high up into this game. Like at one point, I swear, I think I was miles above the earth, and I could still peer down and see areas down below and go, okay, I want to go over that way. And you can, if you have enough stamina, you can float down from the very highest reaches of the sky down to a point down below, and then down into the earth, where there is a whole area underneath the earth, underneath the land of Hyrule below, the depths of Hyrule, where it is completely dark, filled with enemies, overrun with this nasty gloom sludge that's covering the earth and will damage you if you touch it. For those who have played Skyrim, there was an area of Skyrim that was vaguely similar to this called Blackreach, where it was a massive section of Skyrim underneath the earth that you could explore. Tears of the Kingdom ups the ante on this and basically says, yeah, this cavernous area underneath Hyrule, it's basically underneath the entirety of Hyrule. There's this massive world underneath there to explore, in addition to the world up in the sky, and then the world of Hyrule itself, which is... Okay, so I know there are a lot of people who are going to complain, well, they just copied the map of the first game. And yes, it is based on that map, but they have changed so much of it that it feels new. Around every corner, there's something new to explore, something new to see, even if you're remaining feet on the ground, I feel.
Okay.
So, before I talk about my opinions on this, I know I've been blabbing a lot here. Jen, you've played this game for, I want to say you've probably played it for about 4 or 5 hours now. I think you've been conservative in your estimates. You've been playing it a good while. What are your thoughts?
Nintendo has more than promised what they said they would for Tears of the Kingdom.
More than delivered, you mean?
More than delivered, yes. It's a very good game. I know I will spend many a weekend playing this for a while. But if you're someone who's hesitating about getting the game, don't. It's worth it. It is so worth it.
I will say, I think that people who didn't like The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild probably not going to like this either. This is still based on the same basic gameplay, even though it expands on it greatly. There's so much more stuff, but the same core gameplay is there. If you didn't like the weapons breaking, they're still breaking here.
Yep.
If you didn't like, looking for shrines and Koroks, you're still going to do that here. If you didn't like, spotting things in a distance and then gliding to them with your glider, if you didn't like the combat, all of that core stuff remains in place here. They've just built on it and expanded it and added so much new stuff. I was talking earlier about how all of the abilities interact with each other, and we kind of got sidetracked and didn't talk about the other abilities. There's one that I talked about, Ultra Hand, where you're connecting together pieces in the environment. There's one called Fuse, where you get to connect things to your weapon, your shield, or your arrow. You can take any, piece of fire fruit that you found, stick it on your arrow, and now you have a fire arrow. Or if you found a bomb fruit, which is something new in this game, now you have a bomb arrow. And there's all kinds of fun to be had there. Another new ability is Ascend, where you look at any spot directly above you. It has to be within maybe a few feet of your head. But if there's a ceiling directly above you, you can jump up into it and swim through it directly up above it so you can get to the floor above. And this makes it so much easier for traversal. If you're at the bottom of a building, you can zip up right to the top. Or if you're in a cave at the bottom of a mountain, you can zip up to the top of a mountain. Finally, there's another ability which is kind of like stasis in the previous game, which allowed you to freeze time and then you'd hit something and then it would go off in a direction. In this game, you reverse time. So if there's an object that's falling, you can hit it with your recall and it will go up into the sky in reverse. Or if an enemy throws something at you, you can recall the object in mid-flight and then it'll go right back toward the enemy. The cool thing about this game is that all of these systems work in concert, where you can take a bunch of objects, stick them together using Ultra Hand. Then you can raise it up using Ultra Hand into the air and drop it down. It'll drop down to the ground. Then hit it with recall. It'll raise back up into the sky. Run underneath it and then use Ascend, and you can ascend into it as it's still floating in the sky based on its memory of how you lifted it before. Yeah. All of this, while it's interacting with objects using the in-game physics system, things can bounce off of it or get lifted up by it. Characters in the environment will respond, all while the lighting system is interacting with it. It's casting real-time shadows on everything below. It's being affected by the wind or the heat or fire. And all of these are so intricately connected, and you have so much ability to influence it that it's made for this massive toy box. Like I said, people are using it to make helicopters or all kinds of crazy contraptions. There is so much potential in this game that gets realized a lot of the time. It's not just potential and, they didn't... No, there's some crazy stuff in this game. This is on top of just how stuffed full of things there is to do and to see. And I felt like anytime I set a task for myself, that between where I was and where I was going to, I found 5 other things that I wanted to investigate. And if I went off and investigated that, I would be spending hours doing that before I finally got back around to doing what I wanted to. At one point, And this is, again, minor spoiler territory, and this is an area that Jen hasn't gotten to, but it's not a major part of the game, so it's not a major spoiler, but there's this one town where I was just going into town because I wanted to use the goddess statue to increase my health and stamina. It's a fairly common thing. You know, you can do it in any town in the game. Well, I go in town, and apparently there's a big kerfuffle because there's a fashionista in town who is butting heads with the mayor. And each of them wants you to help them with their side of a mayoral election. They're trying to go up against each other in this election. And meanwhile, the spouse of the mayor and the sister of the fashionista both want you to investigate their significant other or their partner or whatever, because they're doing something shady at night. Wonder what's going on with that. And so you're getting involved in local politics and in, sneaky stuff. Like at one point, I dived into the well underneath town so I could pop up while they were in their house and sneak a peek at them and see what they were doing. And just the fact that this was in the game was amazing. There's one town where you're told very early on is being attacked by pirates. And so if you want, you can go to this town and sneak around and attack the pirates are basically the villain creatures you fight throughout the game. But basically you can save the town from these pirates and then help them to rebuild this town. Oh, geez, there's so many different things here.
Okay.
It's a lot.
Let's just have everybody find out for themselves then.
Oh, but I want to talk about it. But yeah, I suppose it's probably better if you find out for yourself. Suffice it to say, this game is one of only 6 games that I have given an A++ grade on eShopper reviews. The other games, for the record, are Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, Super Mario Odyssey, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Skyrim, and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. This is the 6th game to get this high in honor, and there's a good reason for it. This is not just one of the best games I played this year, not just one of the best games I've played on Nintendo Switch. This is one of the best games I have ever played on any platform. I highly, highly, highly recommend it.
All right. So that wraps things up for this month's eShopper Reviews podcast. Again, we want to thank all of our patrons on Patreon for contributing. Patron donors are the first ones to gain access to these podcasts, and if you are interested in becoming a donor, please check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/eShopperReviews. And once again, if you're curious to read any of the reviews or content mentioned in this podcast, you can find it on the eShopper Reviews subreddit at reddit.com/eShopperReviews. Once again, this has been Jen Ip
and Jake McNeil.
We'll see you next month. In the meantime, we both hope you found this content helpful and enjoyed some good games. Catch you all next time.
Later.